This is what happens when only one company is left to compete with itself. You end up with these regurgitated products, stagnant prices, and little to no performance improvement between generations. That sounds awfully familiar. The RTX 2080 Super from NVIDIA replaces NVIDIA's own RTX 2080. And for that, you're getting a tiny little bit of extra performance. 128 more CUDA cores results in incremental performance upgrades across the board. I'm really not even sure that's the right word to use in this context. We're talking very small upgrades, folks, but free upgrades nonetheless. This is gonna go back and forth quite a bit. Let's get started. Some things are naturally flexible. I am not one of those things, and power supply cables aren't either until now. Fractal Design's Ion Plus Platinum power supplies pack their new UltraFlex DC cables for game-changing and effortless cable routing in even the tightest of spaces. And thanks to a modular design, you can connect only what you need. So yeah, Fractal made a power supply as flexible as Pepsi. And that's probably the most scientific conclusion I can come to. Check out their new Ion Plus Platinum power supplies, linked below. So we're gonna jump straight into the benchmarks with this one. The test bench is linked down below if you want to check it out, but it's exactly the same as it was for 5700 and XT benchmarks, which you can check out in this video right here. Straight out of the gate, the 2080 Super runs at a modest 80 degrees Celsius under load, nothing too worrisome, and every card will vary to a certain degree. This is technically the reference model after all, but you can see how AIBs perform much better in this regard thanks to their custom coolers. So in short, only buy the Founders Edition, that's this card right here, if you're more of an aesthetic person than a performance or sound person. I mean, if you think the card looks awesome, then that's, in my opinion, the only reason you should buy this particular model. And remember, hotter cards typically run louder as a consequence, hence the reason why I'm showing sound test. Moving on, in terms of compute power, the 2080 Super falls right in line where we'd expect it to, just above the original RTX 2080. I don't have a 2080 Ti, I've never owned one, no, I've never been sent one, so that's why you won't see one in these charts, but needless to say, it scores just above the 2080. Surprise, surprise. And throughout these benchmarks, you'll see a nearly identical story. Regardless of resolution, up until the CPU becomes a hefty bottleneck, the margins between these cards remain relatively unchanged. GTA 5, liberal in-game settings, reveals a 2080 Super that struggles to even distinguish itself from its own previous iteration. This, of course, will vary from game to game, but it's something you should be aware of. In the DX12 API, things look a bit better for the Super, but this is honestly nothing worth getting excited over. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, DX12, same story. We're talking maybe a 5 frame per second delta on average between the 2080 Super and the regular old 2080. And in the Vulkan API, Doom reveals yet again just how beautiful it can be. We were maxing out the frame rate throughout the 2080 Super's benchmark, and that's why you see our graphs looking a bit weird. 4K does spread things out just a bit, but the margins themselves, percentage-wise, are about the same. So look, the fact of the matter is the RTX 2080 Super was never meant to crush its previous iteration. In fact, looking at the spec sheet, we find that the original 2080 TU104 die was stripped of a few SMs and thus CUDA cores, 64 CUDA cores per SM, to artificially cripple performance out of the gate. Then, voila, NVIDIA unlocks the remaining SMs and we get free performance. It's the exact same architecture, it's actually the exact same GPU. This isn't the first time we've seen something like this, and I'm not just faulting NVIDIA here, but I've gotta say, the practice itself is pretty crappy, if I'm being honest. To those who haven't yet jumped into the RTX ring, the 2080 Super might look like a free performance boost, but to those who already purchased an RTX 2080, you've got to be feeling pretty gypped right now. I mean, if I went out and purchased an RTX 2080 day one, which is obviously what NVIDIA wants, and then found out a year later that my card was actually being sold again, but this time with a fully unlocked architecture, save power limitations and such. Oh, and for the same price, that's another important aspect of this whole conversation. Same price as before, I'd feel pretty pissed off. Now, is it illegal? No, absolutely not. No one here is saying that it's illegal, but the practice itself is kind of like a double body slam, one after another. Early adopters are already paying more upfront to buy a new card. That's what NVIDIA wants. But if demand is high and supply is fixed, then the asking price rises in response, right? That's why usually cards out of the gate, when people want them the most, tend to be a bit more expensive than a year after the launch. By the way, we've seen a similar thing with Intel recently, only in their case, demand was rather fixed and supply dropped, which means that in that scenario, as well as the former, the price is hiked. But remember, in the former, that hurts early adopters more than anyone else. We tend to be okay with that and accept the underlying market forces that drive these prices, but to make matters worse, we've got companies willing to cripple performance out of the gate. This means early adopters not only pay more, but also deal with products that don't live up to their full potentials, because that's what NVIDIA wants. It's actually genius on NVIDIA's part, if I'm being completely honest. And that's assuming that this was their plan. Look, I don't know for sure if they got to double dip and that was the plan to begin with. I mean, that's essentially what it looks like on paper. And yeah, they can do it because no one else is competing with them in the high-end consumer graphics card market. This is what happens when only one company is left to compete with itself. You end up with these regurgitated products, stagnant prices, and little to no performance improvement between generations. That sounds awfully familiar. So I'm not super thrilled about the RTX 2080 Super. I'm also not super upset. You've noticed I didn't even bother filming B-roll for this video. It looks virtually identical to previous cards, just a little more shiny. I mean, this is just kind of a meh launch, right? It's a hotter card than the base 2080, consumes more power, it has higher base and boost clocks, obviously, and it performs around 5% faster. It's the same price, which is fine. At least they aren't charging more for it. That would be grounds for a totally different video. But still, if you bought into the 2080 a year ago, I'm sorry. Or maybe you're not upset because it's only 5%, right? Roughly, give or take. You still should have gotten the 5% to begin with, in my opinion. And if you've been waiting to get into high-end gaming, with ray tracing enabled, and so RTX would be the only cards to look into for that, I guess now's your chance. I'll leave it at that, I guess. Thanks for watching. If you guys like this one, thumbs up, click that red subscribe button, and stay tuned for the next one. This is Science Studio. Thanks for mehing with us. That was kind of a lame outro, but you know what I mean.